Namaste and welcome to the Bharat Varta podcast. One of the most fascinating stories this year, amidst all of the gloom and doom of the pandemic, has been the Reliance story. But I'm sure you, like me, have plenty of questions about it, and I can't find anyone more eminently qualified to address these than my friend Rajiv Mantri, who you've heard many times on the Bharat Varta podcast before, speaking about business and economy. Rajiv is an investor and writer. He has a new book out with Harsh Madhusudan, another eminent Bharat Varta guest, called A New Idea of India, which you definitely should check out. We did an episode about it some weeks ago, in fact. Today, we'll be unpacking various elements of the Reliance story, from the juggernaut fundraising to that epic AGM that they did to 5G and beyond. Before we begin, I'm obligated to tell you that none of this qualifies as financial advice. Please use your discretion. So, all right, Rajiv, with that out of the way, how's it going? How's the book?
Book has been going well, Roshan. Got some good feedback, good reviews from number of people, a number of public personalities, number of readers and reviewers online. So yeah, it's been selling well too. The publishers tell us. So
Right.
pretty happy about that.
Yeah. No, like I think I've mentioned this before. It's a sort of a book of books, right? I mean, it has so
Right.
many threads within it, as is evidenced by the notes that you have. I mean, you have over 60 pages of notes in the book. And to me, it's a rabbit hole quest for anyone interested in exploring these ideas further, you know?
Yeah. So Harsh and I tried to be really thorough with our all kinds of sort of claims and facts that we presented, as well as even drawing out certain hypotheses and projections. We tried to back it up with analysis and
Yeah.
information from academia, from other kinds of research sources. So yeah, I do think it's a pretty thorough work actually.
Right. Yeah, it shows. It definitely shows, and it's a enjoyable read as well. All
Right.
right, let's get to the podcast that we have at hand. Uh, you saw the Reliance story this year, right? I mean, you've been observing this from very close quarters. The whole fundraising spree. I mean, 1.5 lakh crores from the likes of Facebook, Google, Silver Lake, Vista, so on and so forth, right? About 13 other investors, I think. How was this planned and executed so well?
So obviously, my view is this kind of a fundraise, probably was in the works for a while.
Hmm.
If you go back to the earlier AGM speeches by the Reliance chairman Mukesh Ambani, he's often talked of this, that we will do this at some point. So I think it was being sort of baked in the oven, and it was just a question of kind of closing. And I guess they picked this moment, and I think it is notable that if you go back 12 years, to the previous kind of big leap which Reliance Reliance Industries as a business had made in when it entered refining. So the commissioning of the Jamnagar refinery had actually happened in the depths of the financial crisis.
Right.
So right after the Lehman collapse is when Jamnagar was commissioned. I think it was in November 2008, if I remember correctly. So I think there's something to be said even for the timing. Uh, Even in the middle of this crisis, the scale on which Geo has raised money, attracting some of the best names in the tech world as well as the private equity world, it has really gotten global attention, both to Reliance and to India.
Right. And was that timing like deliberate or anything? I mean, what was the thinking behind it?
Yeah, so obviously we'll never know, but I think deals like this, they would have been in the pipeline for some
Oh,
months,
yeah, yeah, exactly. Right,
and at least some months, if not longer than that. And
right,
then the timing of triggering, obviously, it happened in March and rather in April. I think the first announcement, the Facebook announcement, came in April,
right.
and then thereafter, it was almost every week that somebody was investing, from Qualcomm all the way to Facebook and the private equity biggies along the way too.
Right. So, this kind of using the balance sheet to build and fund new businesses, has it ever been done at this scale? I think they've divested all said and done, maybe about 32, 33%. I think they've divested. Yeah.
That's right. No, so I think it has been done. Obviously, the most recent example is Reliance itself, right?
Hmm.
So a lot of people, sitting today presume that Reliance was always in the energy and refining business. But if you rewind 20 years ago, if you go back to 1998, 1999, and you see what Reliance was doing, well, there was no Jamnagar refinery at that time.
Hmm.
It was conceptualized when Dhirubhai Ambani was there, and it was built out over the next 8-9 years, and finally commissioned in the throes of the financial crisis, like I mentioned. But I think that's the key to sort of understanding Reliance. That this is a company that that motto which they have, growth is life. They take that seriously.
Hmm.
Uh, I don't think it's just like corporate spiel, but they do take that pretty seriously. So they entered that part of the business because they saw sort of a large sort of market there, and they had no background, right, in refining and that way, and they just went and invested this huge amount of capital in building, frankly, what is one of the world's best refineries. It is a true engineering marvel in terms of its flexibility. Flexibility, it's kind of a jargon in that world. For essentially, it can take in almost any kind of crude oil and convert that into saleable products. So that flexibility of that refinery, and what's called the Nelson complexity, the NCI, Nelson Complexity Index, in terms of the breadth of the products they can produce. So both are, I think, it would probably be among the top 2 or 3 refineries in the world, and Reliance built that not having any track record or background in this particular sector.
Right.
So that was another example actually of a corporate taking a risk like that. They sort of bet heavily, they bet big, and obviously Jamnagar vaulted the company into another trajectory altogether.
Right. So this is not new to them in
No.
taking ambitious bets and moving into new spaces and building sort of categories and so on, right? So
Yeah.
yeah.
I think
So
that is the key to understanding Reliance, I feel.
Mhm.
This business started as a kind of a trading business, right? And then they were producing textiles. They were making sort of textiles under the Vimal brand name, and then they kept backward integrating all the way into refining, which is what the Jamnagar project was about.
Right.
And then I think there was an attempt actually to globalize in that space. The I think the sharper observers, those with a longer memory, maybe they will recall that Reliance had tried to acquire this company called LyondellBasell,
Hmm.
a large company in a similar space back in, again, just after or around the financial crisis, 2009-10. So unfortunately, that acquisition didn't materialize for them. That acquisition didn't work, and then the beast starts looking for, where do I grow next? So I think the reason, I think telecom was always on the cards, but there were some constraints around, there was a separation between the Ambani brothers, which kind of limited Reliance from entering telecom because of the non-compete agreement which they had. And ADAG, the Anil Dhirubhai Ambani group, was already in telecom.
Hmm.
And once I think that non-compete was exhausted, or they found a way around it, and then they were able to get back into the telecom business, because I think Mukesh Ambani has always seen the potential of this business. Actually, it's pretty
Right.
clear.
Right. So let's talk about the Reliance Geo Vision, right? I mean, we got a glimpse of that in the AGM that was held earlier this year. How do you see that coming around?
No, so the amazing thing is, they are bringing tech back
Hmm.
for front and center. My view has always been that, if we rewind like 5-7 years, and you look at the telecom scene in India, these companies have become like FMCG businesses.
Hmm.
Everyone is talk about, oh wow, did you see that awesome ad from Airtel? Did you see that amazing ad from Vodafone? I mean, think about it.
Right.
What are we talking about? It's a telecom company, and people are praising their ads, right? Like,
Right.
this is not a consumer business. Like,
Yeah.
where is the innovation? Like, what are you doing in terms of wireless network, in terms of your telecom engineering? Very vast number of Indians back then. If you go back to 2014, 15, how many people had 4G? Most of the world had already sort of adopted 4G, and beyond the top Indian cities, hardly any where in India you could get 4G, and it was prohibitively expensive. So that was the scene actually. So Jio obviously started in September 2016, and in the years preceding that, telecom had just become like, there were some 8 or 10 telecom companies in India, which itself was absurd. And all of them are competing on for winning the best advertisement sort of prize. Uh, so it had become like a very strange kind of industry. And then obviously I think the entry of Jio has brought competition back. It sort of created a product for India at that price point, where let me quote some numbers. For example, in 2014, the monthly data consumption per unique user in India was just about 90 megabytes. We are talking 90 megabytes a
Wow.
month. I mean, it's laughably low, right? And today, it is north of 8 gigabytes.
Wow.
Probably, I mean, the number I have is from 2018, but it may even be north of 10 gigabytes a month. And
that number relative to global numbers is even more interesting, right?
Yeah, because India is the largest consumer of
Exactly.
wireless data.
Yeah.
The monthly per user data consumption in India is the highest in the world, I think now. So
Right.
so even the number of smartphones. I mean, smartphones were like a status symbol, right? I mean, they were so expensive.
Right.
I mean, obviously they're still expensive smartphones today, but back in 2013, 14, feature phones dominated the market, and there too we've seen like Jio innovating by developing a kind of hardware product for India with the
Right.
Jio phone.
Right.
So it is actually, I think, probably the only example in the world of a hardware plus telco service plus services, and even software, like even the sort of indigenized operating system that is on the Jio phones. So it is like a complete bundle actually, which is very, very interesting. I don't think we've seen anything like this in the world before.
Right. I mean, it boggles my mind actually, because it's so full stack. If you look at it, I mean, it's got infra, it's got apps, it's got services and everything. I mean, like, how does one go about building such a business? I mean, you can't simply acquire these pieces and sort of assemble them together. How does that happen? How does this come to be actually?
No, I think the way they went about it was, they saw that so Jio probably saw that what's available in the market, what's available off shelf, simply doesn't fit with the profile of the Indian consumer. So whether it's the hardware, whether it's the the service sort of the price point of the service, none of that fits with the profile of the Indian consumer. And so they said, how should we create a service, create a product that will appeal to 95% of India. And I think they pretty much like built it backwards and were willing to take risks. Very, very entrepreneurial. If you go down to the campus they have in Navi Mumbai, lots of young people at work there, and doing obviously extraordinary sort of stuff as we've seen in the last 3 years on all these fronts.
Right. And this story is going to, further sort of catapult once 5G innovation kicks in, right? I mean, I think that is one of the questions that we had on Twitter as well. At Bhavarogi says, how and when Jio is implementing 5G? You want to take that, Rajiv?
Yeah, sure. So 5G, obviously, I think it's still early days. For example, the first thing you need is a spectrum, right? And still, India has not had spectrum auctions. So a 5G spectrum auction is still, not been done yet, I think. And I think there are trials happening, but I don't think any of the telcos have commercially available spectrum to offer 5G. Frankly, very few countries have that live today. I think South Korea has it. Parts of the United States have it, but 5G fundamentally, has many differences with 4G, where it is much more short range. Like, so for example, you need the kind of infra density, the telco infra density has to be much higher. There is also this huge trend of softwareization, actually, what's called softwareization of wireless networks, where initially the telco vendors, which are the likes of Ericsson and Nokia, Huawei as well, obviously. So they would offer the telecom equipment to the telecom service providers, who would then build out networks with that equipment and so on. But now what is happening is there is a kind of virtualization happening, where uh, the hardware piece of it is getting commoditized.
Right.
So you don't need to have custom hardware, but you can have standardized hardware, and you can have basically software to sort of have like dynamic network capacity allocation between different areas of the network. So that means that asset utilization, your network sort of utilization improves dramatically.
Right.
And so that is the kind of objective that this what Geo has done with Open RAN, for example. So let's see if that gets implemented. I mean, obviously none of this is live yet. This is all very experimental. The spectrum has to come in. Some of these technologies have to go live in the sort of wild, and then we'll see how it plays out. But some of the things that were demoed, for example, in the AGM, those kind of use cases have, I think, unique kind of value for India, especially with the agriculture reform that we've seen. So what opportunities will open up in agri-tech, for example, the digitalization of agriculture. In edutech, we're already seeing the enormous interest that investors have. Some really globally giant businesses coming out of India now. I think the largest edtech company in the world now is obviously Byju's,
Right.
for example. So all these things are happening, and I think some technology like 5G, which offers both very high speed as well as very low latency, will make these even more appealing for a country like India, which can then leapfrog into the state of the art.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you've spoken about virtualization before on the podcast as well, right? And how it'll herald a whole new era of services. I think
Yeah.
you gave the example of someone in Bihar, for example, teaching yoga to someone in California and so on, right? And yeah, that's quite an exciting, possibility for.
It's already happening, right? For example, now, I mean, because of the experience of the last 7-8 months through the pandemic, so many tuition classes for students have gone online. Even gym instructors, yoga instructors, they are delivering classes on Zoom. I myself have signed up for a few of these. So,
Right.
I mean, you would not think of doing that in a pre-pandemic world, but
Right.
in the current situation, people are like, fine, let's give it a shot. And frankly, it works very well for even service providers, right? So, you are teaching a class from home. You have that operating leverage where you can have 5 students and add on like 3 more at essentially no cost.
Right.
And that doesn't really deprecate the experience for the entire class. In fact,
Right.
that sociability aspect actually, in some cases, may even make it more attractive.
Right. And it converts, all of them into entrepreneurs, so they
Yeah,
can
yeah.
start, monetizing their services and, directly, right, without any middlemen as such.
So that yoga example which you were mentioning. So if today, if someone is sitting in Bombay taking a class from someone in Delhi or Calcutta, you could be in Bombay or you could be on the West Coast in the US or you could be somewhere in Europe. Doesn't matter.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that is one useful byproduct that we spoke of, the whole virtualization and stuff. But then if we just pull back and look at, network access, the whole ecosystem capabilities as such, right? How the whole tide will rise. What are some of the other useful byproducts that you see as a result of all of this innovation?
No, so if we talk specifically of India's needs,
Hmm.
I think education is a huge gap. So some days ago I was just mentioning on Twitter about the whole fiasco that is the 100% cutoff rate in some of the DU colleges. They have 100% cutoff. So I wonder what the cutoff will be next year. So then I was just saying that this is kind of a farce, and then somebody on Twitter who's apparently a student there, uh, he or she said that like even computer science students who are in DU, they don't really learn much from the lectures. They are learning online.
Right.
They are finding content online for CS, and they are kind of teaching themselves.
Right.
But they just go to DU for the credential that they went to a college and they have a BSc in computer science or whatever to show. But I mean, that just kind of tells you how broken the education system is in India.
Right.
Now, many sectors like that. So, in terms of use cases, impact, and so on, many sectors like that. Imagine what like widespread virtualization would do for sectors like education.
Right.
You can circumvent the entire government-based schooling university system. You can essentially decredentialize. You don't need to waste like 3-4 years in some DU college just for the heck of it. College in a way can become optional if you have those skills and you have some other way of proving that you have those skills rather than a piece of paper given by Delhi University. That's a better pathway. I mean, why should we waste resources on that?
Right.
So I think particular sectors where there are gaps in India, supply gaps in India, those supply side gaps will be bridged by technologies like this.
Right. Yeah, with education specifically, I mean, I think, credentialed education, like university education, will only be relevant for government jobs going forward, I think, because if enough people in the private sector recognize that, that a piece of degree or whatever it is from Coursera is, arguably more worth it than, your DU or VTU or whatever it is, then, that's just going to start that whole domino effect, right? I mean,
and frankly, those who have those skills can enter the workforce straight away.
Exactly.
Why must they while away 3-4 years for a piece of paper? It's just not necessary.
Right. So on that same note, we have a question on Twitter. So at Shreyas_Mysuru says, what is the plan with Jio apps? Do you think they will continue to develop apps in-house with pathetic user interface, or they will come to the realization that it isn't their cup of tea and do what it has done in retail, acquire and integrate? Well, pretty strong language there. And also, I think he's probably basing it on the Zoom equivalent that Reliance produced, right? So
in some ways, actually, I think Jio has done that. Like if you see what they did with Saavn, for example, the music app.
Right.
So Saavn was obviously a standalone app, and then it was acquired by Jio. Now it's called Jio Saavn. So then I think that the Jio app was called Jio Music. That's been kind of integrated with Saavn, and you have Jio Saavn. So it's true. In some of the categories, I think the incumbents are too far ahead, and it probably doesn't make sense for Jio to have their own offering, or hard to see how they will compete with that.
It doesn't make sense as well, right? I mean, when your own equity is valued as much, I mean, why not just part with a bit of it and then acquire these guys in such a down market anyway, right? So I think
and it's also I mean, you can still offer you don't need to own all of it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's okay to partner with them as well. You don't have to own the app per se.
Right.
I mean, for example, they have on the entertainment side, I think Jio offers a very good portfolio, but they've still partnered with Hotstar, with Netflix. There are with Jio Fiber, for example, all these services are bundled. And if you sign up for one of those sort of not the entry level but slightly higher plans, then you have all these services bundled. So in a way, they're competitors of Jio, but also there's scope for partnering in this. It's not a zero-sum game like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, maybe, I mean, I don't know. I mean, we might have an equivalent of a Play Store. Who knows, right? Like a Geo Store kind of a thing. Given, how opaque Google and Apple have been about their store policies and stuff like that. There is
Right.
already an undercurrent of people wanting an indigenous store as such. So that's a possibility as well, right? In terms of apps and services being
Huge.
routed
For
through
sure, for
Geo.
sure. I mean, that's probably one of the biggest debates going on. I would say not just in India but globally.
Yeah.
Uh, the opacity of the policies that the
Mm.
big tech companies have. On what basis they accept or reject certain apps, as well as that what's called the 30% tax, right?
Mm.
The
Yeah, that's insane.
in a way, the big tech guys are, I like to say they're the zamindars of the internet. Uh,
Yeah,
so so anyone who wants to do business on the internet has to pay them off in one form or the other.
right,
And,
right.
and I mean, that's not to say that I mean, some of it is obviously perfectly legitimate, but some of it will raise like questions about data security, sovereignty, and so on. Because how much control would any country kind of give up, right? Given the importance of digitalization,
Hmm.
there will be sort of pushback domestically, and we're already seeing that with the way Paytm launched their own sort of app store, and there was a huge like outcry against Google for suddenly enforcing that 30% charge,
Right,
and all the Indian app providers, software makers were pretty agitated about that.
right. Yeah, it's pretty random, and I think that is one scope that might open up. Right now, let's talk about the telecom sector itself. I mean, as you rightly mentioned, there hasn't been much technology innovation as such. In fact, I mean, first time I think we are in sync with the spectrum cycles globally, right? Or
Absolutely.
close to at least, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
very much.
yeah, and they've typically operated, as you mentioned, like FMCG companies relying on pricing, advertising, and so on. um, so how does it impact telecom itself? You've seen plenty of flux with what has happened with Idea Vodafone, for example, the Airtel stock tanking, and so on and so forth, right? um, how does all of this impact the telecom sector itself?
No, so those couple of things that you're mentioning
Mm,
about the other players. So there was the huge issue of the adjusted gross revenue case, right, which was going on in the Supreme Court.
right.
So obviously, and if you look at what the claim was, it appears to me like the government was in the right, and the telcos kind of were taking an aggressive view, and that kind of penalty with interest and with compounded over. Frankly, this case has been going on for 16, 17 years.
Mm,
So compounded over that period, it's become a massive amount of money, which has kind of really kind of hamstrung some of the companies, particularly Vodafone Idea. So that in a way it has become a bottleneck for India going forward with spectrum auctions,
right,
because the telcos are like, sorry, we don't have any money. How will we pay for any spectrum?
right,
Uh, so maybe that's been one of the reasons why auctions have been delayed. But you're right that India probably for the first time in the last 20-25 years, we are in a situation where kind of coincident with the rest of the world, we have a chance to sort of start deploying the next generation of telecom, which is 5G.
right,
So the reason that's important is not having a time lag, not having a 3-4 year lag like that, will enable Indian entrepreneurs to develop services on top of that network. And
right,
then something works in India, you can globalize, right? Because other countries also have 5G. Their customers may have similar needs and so on. So this is, I think, unprecedented actually in many ways. What usually used to happen was, we deployed 2G and then we wait for many years, and then the rest of the world goes on to 3G and we're still on 2G, and then we get 3G, and the same cycle repeated with 4G.
yeah,
Part of it was also due to the corruption scandals a decade ago under the second term of the UPA government when it came
right.
out. So those delays actually really hamstrung,
Mm,
I would say, the whole kind of tech startup ecosystem in the country. Because if your number of users is on a generation old technology and the rest of the world is going forward, then what are you building for? You're building for something that is going out of date. And by the time you sort of build for the new technology, the others have already figured out new kinds of models, new kinds of services, and
right.
and Plus, India is always, a deployment market. It's a country where, the kind of big players from the US, Europe, or other countries, other geographies, they come in and they deploy their apps, and there is no such thing as a Indian sort of dominant player. So
Right.
that may change for the first time if India is able to do auctions in time, build out the networks in time with 5G and so on. That's why
Right.
it's very exciting, because all those elements are coming together. We have the risk capital available, we have a talent pool available, network is sort of getting there. So those pieces are all together for the first time, probably.
Right. So while all of this, innovation is being cheered, in the same breath, there are some concerns about certain monopolistic tendencies and so on, right? We're already seeing that telecom will become a three-player market and so on, right? So how do you sort of address concerns about, this becoming sort of a monopoly as such?
So I think we have regulators for that, right? We have the TRAI, we have the Competition Commission. I think the risk of frankly, the duopoly would have been a bigger problem,
Hmm.
and the survival. I mean, I think Vodafone Idea is going to survive. Whether it thrives is a different question, but it will survive. So I don't see the telecom market becoming a two-player market. I don't even think the government wants it to become a two-player market, because if it's a two-player market, then there are all kinds of other problems that come in. So the regulators, in a sense, know that their work will increase manifold if there are only two players in telecom industry, and thus they don't want that to happen. And obviously, Vodafone now it looks pretty likely. Like I said, that it is going to survive. It looks less likely whether it will thrive. But I mean, a few other things have to happen for that.
Right.
But I'm not so sort of fearful of that. That telecom will become a monopoly, or only one player will be left. I mean, that's not going to happen. I mean, I think India will continue to have 3+1, which is the three private sector players, and plus one BSNL.
Right. But given that, the amount of capex and the amount of, the advantages inherent in something like, building a geo, right? Uh, how do you make it viable for maybe new entrants to sort of compete with geo and so on, even if not at the same scale?
No, so it's obviously difficult now for a new entrant to come in,
Hmm.
but the incumbents. So Vodafone, Idea, Bharti Airtel, BSNL, and Jio. So they are the four players, right? BSNL obviously it has its own set of issues. Perennially loss making, government owned, lower accountability, and things like that. So let's park that for a minute. When it comes to Vodafone Idea and Airtel, well, Vodafone and Airtel were already sharing a lot of infrastructure. So the telecom tower infrastructure was already being shared by them extensively. And like I mentioned, the whole, what's called the softwareization of wireless equipment, that's going to create, it is a fundamental shift actually in the whole sort of telecom equipment side of the equation. And let's see how that plays out. I think still the vendors themselves are trying out different things. In fact, some telcos have also gone, like Reliance, for example, has developed its own indigenous kind of solutions and technologies for that.
Right.
I think it is still kind of in flux. But I think the moot point, the fundamental point is that this is not going to be a repeat of 4G where you have vendors and the same model is not going to be deployed. It's going to be something different.
Right. So, I want to come back to something that you mentioned, which is that we now have the opportunity to compete with the likes of an Apple or a Google, uh, at the world stage, right? Uh, for once, I mean, we are in sync with the cycles, and for once, this whole free market notion that people espouse, all the time, it could actually work in our favor when we become producers rather than consumers of some of these apps and services, right? uh, how do you see that playing out? I mean, imagine that Geo tomorrow has to compete with an Apple or so on, right? How do you see that a possibility taking shape at all?
No, so just to rephrase, so I was saying in terms of not with big tech. I mean, I think big tech is these are giants, right? I mean, these are hard for a new company in India
Hmm.
to sort of take on these giants. I mean, hard for any new company anywhere to take on these giants. So I was talking more in terms of, let's say, if you look at the mid caps, sort of the mid tier or the mid cap space in IT, in
Hmm.
SaaS, in other kinds of areas.
Hmm.
I think that's where we'll see more action. We'll see Indian companies going out, getting big,
Hmm.
and over an 8-10 year period, you could even see them getting very big. Which to us it sounds difficult to believe today. But let me give you an example. I mean, how many people would have said that one day TCS would be bigger than IBM?
Yeah.
But that's happened. I think in that sense, where in the sense of kind of the venture ecosystem, the mid cap IT ecosystem coming up in India, in infotech, in software, those kind of things. I mean, just having universally available, ubiquitous internet access enables many things. All kinds of businesses can come up in India, which can then globalize.
Right.
And actually, Geo would be one of them.
Right.
Uh,
No, that is of course going to happen, right? I mean, you're going to have that. It's kind of a second order effect, I would say, right? With the infrastructure, with the network access and everything in place. I mean, a bunch of people will leverage that and compete with the best of the best, right? But
already happening. It's already happening,
right,
actually.
it's already happening. Correct. I was thinking of a possibility of Reliance or Jio becoming sort of a ByteDance, or which can acquire and sort of play in multiple different markets in the world markets itself. Do you see that happening at all?
No, I think for that to sort of take shape, let's see. I think it's inevitable, but I would not sort of venture a guess on when.
Right.
Certainly not in the next 1 or 2 years. I think it'll take more time.
Right.
For Geo in particular to achieve that, I think it would need to really build, scale in the Geo Mart business that they are sort of pursuing, the whole retail piece of it.
Mm-hmm.
So if they get extraordinary scale there, then there is a clear possibility
Right.
that Geo gets into the league of Tencent, Alibaba,
Yeah.
and others.
Right. So one of the things that the Prime Minister has espoused this year is the whole Atmanirbhar Bharat vision, right? Building local indigenous capabilities and everything. And Reliance is a fantastic story in that regard. How does this all come together with the Atmanirbhar Bharat vision?
I think it starts with their focus on looking at India's needs. I think the reason Jio is so successful is that they have aligned with what India needs today. Instead of offering like 1,200 rupees a month for 3 GB of data, today voice is free, data is like practically free. If you are above a certain income group, it is literally free for you, right? It doesn't matter. The cost almost doesn't matter. So in that sense, I think it's a great model for how to think about building a business in India, because I mean they've shown that there is a lot of value to be created if you just cater to what Indians need. A lot of people, believe that this is not a market that's worth going after. Uh, but it's the classic, that business school trope about the bottom of the pyramid, and servicing the needs of that customer, making things easier for them. I mean, obviously, all this has also been enabled by kind of good public policy work, good governance on the digital side of things. The India Stack and other kinds of technologies that have come in with Aadhaar. I mean, for example, for Jio to enroll so many users, to kind of capture so many users so fast, they would not be able to do without eKYC. The electronic know your customer, in like literally minutes, you can sort of with Aadhaar register a customer, give them a SIM card. In the old world, it would take like probably days, if not several days.
Right.
So that sheer speed of acquisition was enabled also by many good initiatives on the digital side by the government of India. So in that sense, I think it's a great kind of case study almost for businesses who believe somehow that the poor or the lower income groups are not customers. I mean, today everyone is on the same quality network, one of the best networks in the world, one of the most high capacity networks. Imagine the kind of usage that this network is supporting.
Mm.
I mean, we're talking about hundreds of millions of people consuming 10 gigabytes a month. That's massive. I mean, imagine the scale of this. So much to learn for, frankly, corporate India from what Reliance Industries has delivered.
Right. Yeah. And this is something that you speak about in the book as well, right? The fact of a domestic market, the size of the domestic market that we have, and how much of sort of a digital sovereignty we can use this for. We can sort of use this as a key policy, uh, uh, sort of a policy asset, right?
So definitely, so India offers a large consumer base, right? No other country has this kind of size. I mean, only China compares, but China is not really an open market. Uh, so all the people who say that the internet is being splintered, well, internet was already splintered. Thank you for realizing that now, because the Chinese internet China was already shut off.
Right.
All these companies.
Right.
So what India offers is size. What India offers is a lot of headroom for growth.
Right.
And for India to kind of leverage that, I mean, the case we make in the book is that certain temporary protections and certain kinds of, I mean, for kind of doctrinaire free trade sort of advocates, this is kind of heresy. But certain temporary protections are, we make the case that they are necessary to nurture domestic industry, because entrepreneurs, they get kind of inured. They get sort of kind of very risk averse to take a leap into a space like that without having certain kinds of protection, for lack of a better word. So that's the case we made in the book. And uh, but the key thing to remember here is that those protections should be temporary,
Mm.
time bound, and obviously we don't want to get into a situation where that businesses are surviving based on tariff protections. So that is the risk. But I think that is a very well recognized risk in India, given the history that we've had with kind of import barriers and tariffs and so on. So I don't see that as a big concern. I think at least this government too is mindful of that, which is why they've been open to FDI. Foreign companies can freely invest, which gives competition obviously to domestic entrepreneurs. So keeping up that competition aspect, along with making in India, or make in India, as the program is called, I think that combination is important for India because it will deliver jobs for the country.
Right. Right. All right. Let's come back to Reliance, the company, again to end things. Right. We're seeing that this is Mukesh Ambani's sort of transition to the next generation. Right. We saw his kids play a pretty active role in the AGM as well. How do you think this will play out? Isha, Akash, and Anand. How do they fit in this whole scheme of things, and what do you see as way forward from now?
Well, this is a tough one. I really don't know, in the sense that obviously these are, whenever the generational transition happens, I mean, these are huge shoes to fill, right? Like
Yeah.
what Mukesh Ambani has delivered, it really is staggering. Frankly, even before Jio, it was staggering, but post Jio now, it is just like something else. I mean, a lot of people say that Reliance, obviously started by Dhirubhai Ambani, and Mukesh Ambani inherited something. But I think they forget that when Reliance was being sort of just getting off the ground, he was in his 20s.
Yeah.
So, it wasn't like he was handed something on a platter. He has been there since inception, and he has created this business along with his father. So in that sense, and it remains that kind of a first generation business, the way I see it. I don't see it as a second generation or that kind of a thing. I mean, there are business houses in the country which are like 3, 4, 5, 6 generations old. This company is not like that. I mean, you don't get to nearly 200 billion market cap in about 45 years with some without some serious entrepreneurial vision.
Yeah. All right, that's a fantastic note to end the podcast on, Rajiv. This has been a fascinating conversation. Got to understand many different facets to the whole Reliance Jio story, and I hope our listeners will appreciate this as well. Thank you so much
Thank you
for
so much
joining
for having
us.
me. Yeah,
Yeah,
thanks a lot for having me, Roshan. Pleasure
thank you,
to chat as
Rajiv.
well.
Yeah,
Yeah, thanks a
pleasure
lot.
as always. Thank you. Thank you for tuning in. This podcast was brought to you by the team at Bharat Varta. If you liked this podcast, then don't forget to share, subscribe, and rate us on your favorite platforms. We're available on Anchor, Apple, Google, Spotify, Stitcher, Breaker, YouTube, and a host of other platforms. We started Bharat Varta to facilitate long form discussions on politics, policy, and culture. We don't necessarily endorse anything that was said in this episode. If you do wish to offer us any feedback on the content or anything else, do reach out to us on social media or get in touch with us on our website, www.bharatvarta.in. The links are in the description below. Thanks again for tuning in. Until next time, stay safe, take care, and Jai Hind.